The working class in the revisionist countries must take the field and re-establish the dictatorship of the proletariat. Article published in the newspaper, Ziri I Populit, March 24. 1968. In all the countries where the revisionists are in power, the dictatorship of the proletariat is being smashed and replaced by the dictatorship of the bourgeoisie, the socialist regime is being replaced by the bourgeois capitalist regime, and the party of the proletariat, degenerate from within, serves only as a smokescreen to conceal this betrayal, to blunt the vigilance and suppress the legitimate revolt of the working class and the working people. The vigilance and legitimate violence of the working class against class enemies is what terrifies the revisionists. It is the only force that can beat them, it is the only way out of this disastrous situation in which socialism and communism are placed today in the countries where the revisionists are in power. Thus, the rekindling and fanning of the flames of the proletarian revolution in these countries is the road of salvation sine qua non. As events have developed, any other course can bring no lasting benefit to the dictatorship of the proletariat, and socialism. It could only serve as a posture of harmful and temporary compromise with grave consequences for socialism. Only the working class at the head of the masses, only the working class headed by its true Marxist-Leninist party, only the working class through armed revolution, through violence, can and must send the revisionist traitors to their grave. All the countries where the revisionists are in power, without exception, both those in the vanguard, such as Yugoslavia, the Soviet Union, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, Poland, etc., or those which, under different masks, hide and camouflage their revisionist, anti-Marxist line, have turned into bourgeois capitalist countries, or are rapidly sinking into that stinking morass. The main question on the agenda of the revisionist traitor cliques in power is only that of choosing the most reliable forms to attain the aim of the restoration of capitalism, of strengthening and stabilizing it, without arousing the suspicions and vigilance of the working class and working people, so as to avert any blows and turmoil, and, finally, to be able to suppress the revolution when it does break out. This is a struggle to win the contest. The other question on the agenda for them, within the framework of this disintegration to attain the aim of the restoration of capitalism, is connected with the efforts of all the other cliques to escape from the tutelage of the most powerful one and yet to have its aid in general, particularly when they feel their positions are weak. The degree of dependence of one on the other is linked with this, while the most powerful among them is trying to prevail over the currents and channel them in its own interests as a great state. Of course, now such a thing cannot be achieved with complete success with all of them or permanently. Another problem that remains on the agenda of these cliques is their tendency and great concern to find various means of camouflage and a diversity of forms of action, which are sometimes much more advanced and less camouflaged than those of their counterparts. These pioneers serve the capitalist forces which inspire the revisionist cliques to urge others to speed up their course to the maximum, to break the resistance of those revisionist cliques which, out of necessity, are more conservative. Because the sword of Damocles, the proletarian revolution, is constantly hanging over the heads of them all. The revisionists try to camouflage all their counter-revolutionary actions for the seizure of power and the efforts they are making to consolidate this power by creating and inculcating in the minds of the working class the illusion that its Marxist-Leninist party is allegedly in power and is guiding all this development and transformation on the true course of socialism and communism. This is the most dangerous disguise with the aid of which the revisionists try to escape the decisive blow of the working class. Therefore, they try to tell the working class that any criticism, any revolt against or opposition to their revisionist course is an anti-Marxist deviation, is a crime against Leninism, against socialism, against the party of the working class. The revisionists administer this opium through the press and their propaganda, which is false and a fabrication from start to finish, administer it while divesting the party, in theory and practice, of any revolutionary characteristics. They administer it by making an allegedly Marxist interpretation of each of their political, economic and administrative actions in the direction of the restoration of capitalism. This false interpretation of their foreign policy, of their relations, alliances and underhand dealings with the capitalists is also necessary to the revisionists in order to blunt the vigilance of the working masses of their respective countries. In all these cunning actions the revisionists set in motion the new corrupted class of bureaucrats who impose themselves upon the working class and the masses with the force of their regime, their length of service, with the rows of medals hiding their false hearts. Thus they create the impression among the working class that, it is not possible that all these fine fellows could betray the party, the class and socialism. We must draw some lessons, some conclusions, from this revisionist counter-revolution. Let us start with Hungary. In the euphoria of the advent to power of Khrushchevite revisionism, but at a moment when it had not yet consolidated its positions, world capitalism, its Titoite agency and the internal Magyar reactionary bourgeoisie launched the armed counter-revolution against the dictatorship of the proletariat and the Hungarian Workers' Party, thinking it was the weakest link of the chain of the socialist countries. And so it was indeed. Rákosi's party melted away like snow in the rain. But in their actions world capitalism and Titoism had not chosen the correct moment. They were convinced of Khrushchev's line of betrayal, but they did not take account. Hungarian Workers' Party, thinking it was the weakest link of the chain of the socialist countries. And so it was indeed. Rákosi's party melted away like snow in the rain. But in their actions world capitalism and Titoism had not chosen the correct moment. They were convinced of Khrushchev's line of betrayal, but they did not take account of the fact that his positions were not yet stabilized and, although he hesitated over sending in the tanks, in the end he was obliged to do so. Otherwise his course of betrayal could have been compromised. But in connection with the Hungarian counter-revolution the following facts must be pointed out. 1. The Hungarian counter-revolution was begun by a few intellectuals and students. Lacking the influence of a genuine Marxist-Leninist party, those vacillating strata became reserves of the counter-revolution and its assault squads under the direction of the bourgeoisie. The Hungarian writers were in the vanguard of this counter-revolution. 2. Despite the revolutionary traditions inherited from the proletarian revolution of 1919, the Hungarian working class and that of Budapest in particular, did not know how to defend its power and gains. On the contrary, a considerable part of the working class, especially in Budapest, was activated in favor of the counter-revolutionaries, hence it became a reserve of reaction. This means, in other words, that the work of the Hungarian Workers' Party was superficial and without any real base. The working class did not fully recognize it as its own leader. This was the greatest and most dangerous evil. The counter-revolution entirely liquidated the Hungarian Workers' Party within a few days, while the counter-revolutionary János Kadar issued the decree for its official dissolution. 1. During the few days of the counter-revolution in Hungary, many bourgeois, capitalist and fascist parties popped up immediately, like mushrooms after rain. Thus, the Hungarian counter-revolution was put down by means of Soviet tanks. Under the dictate of the Khrushchevite revisionists, the same traitor who liquidated the party issued the other decree for the refounding of the allegedly new Marxist-Leninist party, the Hungarian Revisionist Party, even more rotten than the previous one. The Hungarian counter-revolution was put down by the counter-revolutionaries. Thus, the two wings of the putsch were bound to come together, as they did, to build their own Hungary, as they did, to restore capitalism, as they are doing. Drawing lessons from the bloodshed and, after having paid an indemnity in blood for its hasty actions, Hungarian reaction is now carrying out its reforms of radical capitalist transformation at its leisure. Regardless of and without any trouble from the Soviet forces and tanks which remain on Hungarian territory. The Hungarian bourgeoisie is, so to speak, going about its business, this time under the protection of Khrushchevite tanks. Under the disguise and banner of the party, the Hungarian capitalist bourgeoisie, hostile to the working class, is lulling the working class to sleep while forging new chains for it. The capitalist bourgeoisie has the old intelligentsia and new revisionist intelligentsia, in complete identity of views and unity of action, as its vanguard. Let us take Poland. As in Hungary, in Poland, two bloody demonstrations started in Poznan in 1956 and were suppressed by tanks, this time Polish and not Soviet tanks. The Polish church and reaction had a hand in it, and Khrushchev was terrified that Poland might break away from the Soviet Union at that time, therefore, he threatened Gomulka with an invasion of tanks, but Gomulka resisted and Khrushchev, willy-nilly, smiled and embraced the fascist Gomulka. As he used to describe him behind his back, in conversation with others. But now, in recent days, events in Poland are developing differently. They have assumed another aspect which is characteristic of all the revisionist countries. In Poland, demonstrations, clashes, bloody encounters have begun between Gomulka's police and the writers, intelligentsia and students, who are demanding freedom, full democracy, liberalization. This time, the Polish counter-revolutionaries, who have risen against the Gomulka revisionist counter-revolutionaries, are congratulating and displaying their solidarity with the Czechoslovak counter-revolutionaries. The reactionary Polish intelligentsia, directed by world capitalism, the clergy and jury, are not satisfied with the Gomulka revisionist clique and want to get rid of it, as the new Slovak clique of Dubiek is doing with the Novotny revisionist clique, about which we shall speak below. In Poland, just as in Hungary, the reactionary intelligentsia and the students are in the forefront with their claims, the party is riddled with vermin, the organs of the dictatorship are, for the time being, in the service of the Gomulka clique, and the working class is not reacting. Is not coming out in the street to do the necessary cleaning. Will the Gomulka clique be able to hold back this mounting tide? We shall see. But the important thing is the ultimate tide which must be prepared in order to wipe all the overt and disguised traitors in Poland off the face of the earth. This salutary tide will be the proletarian revolution of the Polish working class, led by a true Marxist-Leninist communist party. Let us take Czechoslovakia. The Soviet revisionists used to trumpet abroad that Czechoslovakia was their most powerful bastion, the most faithful country of the revisionists, and Antonin Novotny the man closest to them, the most earnest and most authoritative man of the revisionist clan, next to the Soviets. And as we had forecast, this situation, too, counted for nothing, not because Novotny and his revisionist clique were not an obedient agency of the Khrushchevites, but because they were quite unable to carry out the orders that the Moscow bosses gave them. In fact, the Soviets' dead horse, Antonin Novotny, got bogged down in the revisionist mire which he himself created, while the other horse which replaced him, Dubiek, has taken the bit in his teeth and is now bolting toward western pastures, where the French and West German capitalists are waiting to corral him. Got bogged down in the revisionist mire which he himself created, while the other horse which replaced him, Dubiek, has taken the bit in his teeth and is now bolting toward western pastures, where the French and West German capitalists are waiting to corral him. And have opened the old chapters about their notorious agents Masaryk, Benes Tiso, Hoxha, and others. How is the new counter-revolution in Czechoslovakia developing? Openly, against Antonin Novotny and his clique, hence against the Soviet revisionist yoke. They are openly going over to capitalism under the system of one party or many parties, under the capitalist state system and the undisguised liquidation of the dictatorship of the proletariat in the economy, education and culture. Not only coexistence, but also solid ties with the Western capitalists are being advocated openly. Homage is being paid at the grave of the Masaryks, father and son, at the grave of Benes, everyone is being noisily rehabilitated, even the fascists, and all are being described as distinguished men, victims of the Stalinist terror and the result of the erroneous policy. Not only of the Novotny clique, but also of Gottwald, hence of the Communist Party of Czechoslovakia and, of course, of Stalin and the Comintern. In short, Czechoslovakia is going at a rapid tempo and without much subterfuge and demagogy towards capitalism, to the complete political, ideological, economic and state restoration of the capitalist bourgeois republic. By what means and forms is this process developing? The Czechoslovak process must not be taken in isolation from the whole process that is taking place within the revisionist fold. This is the result of the disintegration, of the major contradictions which exist within the revisionist clan, within the different tendencies which exist within the clan of each individual revisionist country, and of the international contradictions. Thus, the Czechoslovak disintegration and the course it has taken are by no means exceptional. Nothing should surprise us. This is quite normal. So is the overt manner of these actions, and this for two reasons. On the one hand, a part of the Czechoslovak people, indeed even of the Czechoslovak working class, are prepared for and predisposed towards this liberal course, as the revisionists call it. To them communism has been merely a veneer, an incident, and during the whole period since liberation the Communist Party of Czechoslovakia has not only failed to work on a sound basis, but, in fact, has made little impression on the nature, the political inclinations, the political and cultural taste of a part of the people, who, even under the socialist regime, preserved and developed bourgeois capitalist sentiments in accentuated forms. On the other hand, the new Czechoslovak course towards capitalism confirms the further decay of the power of Soviet revisionism which, wallowing in the morass it has itself created, is no longer a threat to its opponents either politically or economically. It has become a slave to the system it has created and the betrayal it has commit. The Soviet revisionists are obliged to grin against the misfortunes which are descending on them. The further course of the Czechoslovak revisionists now has the full support, not only of the American, French and West German imperialists, but of course, of the Titoites, the neutral revisionists and, in petto, of the Hungarian revisionists as well. Thus, a more or less organized force is taking shape, always within the framework of disintegration and independence from the Soviet, Polish and other revisionists, who are very much afraid of this contagious disease which has the tendency to clear out the old revisionist hacks and replace them with new ones. The new Czech counter-revolutionaries are using new, many-sided methods. They attach great importance to taking the internal situation completely into their own hands, without neglecting foreign policy. Naturally, for purposes of demagogy they speak publicly about friendship with the Soviet Union, in order to completely undermine it. Their principal aim is the liquidation of Novotny and his clique, which is pro the Soviet revisionist leadership, and the reduction of relations with the Soviet Union to mere trade relations. The campaign for the liquidation of Novotny, to expose and compromise him, and finally to remove him, was carried out in a roundabout way. In the forefront of this campaign were the Slovak nationalists with their anti-Czech feelings, the old bourgeois intellectuals and the new revisionist ones, as well as students and hooligans who came out repeatedly in demonstrations and are still doing so. The Novotny group and their Kremlin bosses sent in the police against them, but to no avail. Aware that the Iremin one's sat-ine noose was tightening around his neck, Novotny called the tanks to Prague, copying the method of Khrushchev who surrounded the Kremlin with tanks and thus saved his head. But Novotny could not attain this aim and lost his job. Perhaps he will lose his head, too. To cover its game, the Dubiek group is using allegedly legal forms to clear out the Novotny clique. First of all, this group made sure of the army through trusted cadres, arranged the defection of a certain army general, discredited Novotny and Lomsky, the defense minister, and set in motion the party. Convinced that Novotny's immediate removal or resignation should be demanded through petty tie-ins, rallies and student demonstrations. This whole operation is being carried out very quickly, with little obvious strife, amidst the stormy applause of world capitalism to whose fold a scabby goat has thus returned. What will the Soviets do? Nothing, except to take Novotny for their collection, if they are permitted, and install him. 2. In a villa as they did with someone else previously after this purge, they will strive to stabilize the situation in Czechoslovakia. However, this will not be the end of the matter. There will be great friction and fierce political and economic struggle. Thus, in these two countries, Poland and Czechoslovakia, where the revisionists are in power, the same process of capitalist degeneration is taking place, with the same aims, forms and methods, but with different outcomes, different results. In both countries, the new revisionist cliques, which want to speed up the process of the transformation of their countries into completely capitalist countries, are striving to get rid of the old revisionist cliques of Novotny and Gomulka. The anti-Czech sentiments of Slovak chauvinism, the radical transformation of the Czechoslovak economy into a capitalist economy, the radical transformation of the existing Czechoslovak structure and superstructure to adapt them to the return to capitalism, the more active and extensive economic, cultural and political ties with the capitalist states, the anti-Soviet feelings, the weakening of all ties with the Soviet revisionists, these are the things that inspire and guide the new Czechoslovak revisionist clique led by Bubsek. The old clique and the old revisionist Novotny are now completely isolated, routed. Everybody is abandoning the sinking ship and taking the new road. Thus, the counter-revolution within the counter-revolution has triumphed in Czechoslovakia. The Soviet revisionists have completely lost their political authority in Czechoslovakia and their influence is on the decline. Knowing what the Soviet revisionists are, we can be sure that they must have exerted great pressure to save themselves from disaster in Czechoslovakia. On the other hand, capitalist Czechoslovakia reinforces the capitalist position of Tito and his friends, assists the complete transformation of Katar's Hungary, with or without him at its head, and assists the process in Poland. This whole situation which is being created in Central Europe will shake the Warsaw Treaty and Comecon to their foundations. It will lead to bilateral and multilateral alliances in a spirit entirely different from that of the existing ones, and Comecon and their economic relations will change, they will break up and assume new forms in which amalgamation with the capitalist forms will take place. All this capitalist transformation seriously endangers democratic Germany, which the revisionists will drive in various forms and ways towards integration with the Germany of Bonn. This process is underway. The Soviet revisionists are completely paralyzed. Economic pressures are their only remaining weapons, but it is clear that these, too, are having no effect. It is greatly in the interests of capitalism to finance those who break away from the Soviet Union and turn towards the West. It has capital for investment at its disposal, it is seeking new markets, new colonies and new satellites. Thus, having seen little benefit from the allegedly internationalist aid of the Soviet revisionists, the new revisionist capitalists are changing their bus. This great defeat of the Soviet leaders is seen in the great confusion which has overwhelmed them. Although these secretions have been going on for a considerable time, the Soviet censorship has not permitted any knowledge of them to leak out to the Soviet public at home. This simply shows how afraid they are of their own people, the revolutionaries, and the new revisionists, and the latter, infected by the Czechoslovak disease, may burst out in the streets against the clique, to overthrow it and replace it with another revisionist clique. In this case Kosygin and Brezhnev will act like the revisionist clan of Gomulka is acting in Poland. The same process as in Czechoslovakia started in Poland, too, but, for the time being, with different results. The Gomulka clan temporarily checked this process, not because Gomulka is any cleverer than Novotny, but because the circumstances are somewhat different in Poland, therefore Gomulka's tactics are different and may appear cleverer. In Czechoslovakia it started with the writers and students, but amongst them, in addition to everything else, anti-Czech Slovak nationalist sentiments and anti-Slovak Czech nationalist sentiments were predominant. The other sentiments were complementary, apart from the anti-Soviet and pro-Western sentiments which were common to all. The process started in the same way in Poland, with the same tendencies, ideas and aims as in Czechoslovakia. The Gomulka clan used police violence, too, just as Novotny did, but with success. The Polish nation is not made up of two peoples, as is the case in Czechoslovakia, therefore that factor which played a role in Czechoslovakia did not serve as an incitement in Poland. Gomulka had to find a scapegoat as an object for violence and he found it in Zionism. Thus, the disturbances in Poland were created by Zionism. Gomulka does not mention the church, because that carries the risk that the revolt might increase and assume larger proportions. Gomulka is trying to keep the church out of it and, in fact, the church did not enter the arena, although at other times it had made fiery appeals and organized demonstrations against Gomulka. It seems that they have come to terms until this tide subsides. On the other hand, Gomulka, rabidly anti-Soviet, is seeking shelter at these moments under the shadow of the Soviet revisionists, who, in the end, when they realize that they have lost everything in Poland, may even dare to intervene, allegedly to save Poland. Allegedly to keep the communication lines open so that they can come to the assistance of East Germany, etc. Willy Brandt, on his part, declared at his party's Congress that it is normal for us to recognize the Oder-Neisse borders. This was an offer to Poland to break Amon to fi its Omaka Persistine in sup the German-Polish borders and finally, it was an attempt to complete the encirclement of East Germany and to form the cordon sanitaire around the capitalist Soviet Union. The result of all these circumstances, the anti-Semitism, anti-Sovietism, etc., is that the process of returning to capitalism in Poland will continue. According to Gomulka. But this is provisional, temporary. The problem is still on the agenda. The Marxist-Leninists, the revolutionaries, the people and the working class in Poland have not yet had their say. Gomulka threw some sections of the working class into demonstrations. This shows what lack of clarity exists there, what an enormous amount of work has to be done in order to put the working class on its true course, in anti-capitalist, anti-revisionist class positions, against Gomulka, against the Catholic Church, against the Zionists. There are also allegedly neutral countries and parties which are developing their revisionist course towards capitalism in comparatively calm internal situations, without noisy demonstrations, although certainly with accentuated contradictions in the leadership, among the people and in the party. But which for the moment have the appearance of unity. This sham unity results from fear of the external danger and, in the first place, from fear of the Soviet revisionists, who have their own men, who are still in the minority, within the leadership of these parties. But in these neutral countries and parties, cliques of bourgeois intellectuals predominate, and they rely solely on the anti-Soviet feelings. Therefore, a little differently from the Czechoslovaks, these revisionists lay the stress on foreign policy, on relations with the capitalist states, with Tito's Yugoslavia, with Dubois Czechoslovakia, to counterbalance the Soviet revisionist danger. In these circumstances these cliques are purging their internal opponents, who might endanger them, and are making efforts to consolidate their bourgeois regimes, which are being established in their countries by liquidating socialism. Let us now take the Soviet Union. The Khrushchevite degeneration of the Soviet Union and the Communist Party of the Soviet Union in the last years of Nikita Khrushchev's reign, and in an even more accentuated manner later, entailed great dangers for the Kremlin clique. Not only has it further deepened the contradictions of this clique with the Soviet people, but it has also created a stratum of new revisionists, opponents of the old revisionist clique, whose aim is to liquidate that clique and replace it with another of the same revisionist nature, but which would be more liberal and speed up the process of the restoration of capitalism in the Soviet Union. These most despicable dregs were not satisfied, displayed their dissatisfaction and advanced further demands. Here, too, they were headed by the intellectuals and writers who had become completely bourgeois, the men of revisionist art and culture. Dissipation had penetrated deeply among the youth, the students, and others. This was assuming forms disturbing to the clique. Khrushchev himself reacted several times after he sensed the danger, not because they were demanding to go over to capitalism, but because they were demanding to go there without him, with others, rather by efforts and action than by buffoonery and irregular methods. The clique that succeeded Khrushchev tried to outdo their master. They linked themselves more closely and more securely with American imperialism, carried the wrecking of the party and the socialist economy further and stepped up degeneration at home and abroad. But all this activity also created colossal difficulties and contradictions for the clique. The Soviet economy declined, the prestige of the Soviet Union reached its lowest ebb, the friends of the Soviet Union deserted it one after another, its alliances assumed purely capitalist, oppressive, formal and ridiculous forms and content. The resistance to the clique increased from all directions. Not to speak of the international arena, at home the Brezhnev-Kosygin group find themselves in the midst of many fires which are difficult to put out. The revisionist intellectuals, writers and students have increased their protest demonstrations and the Kremlin clique is obliged to arrest and imprison them. Thus, the prisons and concentration camps are filled to capacity, not only with revolutionaries, but also with new counter-revolutionaries. Of course, within the Soviet Union the proletarian revolution is being organized and on the rise. The clique is very much afraid of this and is attacking it, trying to deceive the party of the class and the working class itself, trying to neutralize them as far as possible by making them believe that it is allegedly their Leninist party which is leading. That everything is proceeding according to the Leninist line and with Leninist norms, and so on. Amongst these illusions we should also include those ideas true to history, expressed about Stalin by certain degenerate careerist army generals and marshals who have started to write in order to throw dust in the eyes of the masses and the genuine revolutionaries. But the Bolshevik revolutionaries and the Soviet working class are not to be deceived for long. They are becoming more and more aware that, in reality, power is being wielded by a clique of renegades and their bureaucratic anti-worker administration, that the party has been transformed into a bourgeois party and the dictatorship is a bourgeois dictatorship of the new capitalist class, which oppresses the masses and the working class, exploits them economically for the benefit of the new revisionist bourgeoisie, does not allow them for one moment to demonstrate their power and exercise their rights. The efforts of the revisionists to make the working class apolitical, to eliminate it from the political scene and orientate it towards economism, will fail. Thus, as we see, all these processes have similar features, at present more obvious and sensational in Czechoslovakia and Poland, tomorrow in Hungary and other places. These processes will further whet the appetite of the reactionary Soviet revisionist intelligentsia, and we shall see clashes, not only between it and the ruling clique, but also between the moderate intelligentsia and its right-wing extremists, between the moderate intelligentsia and its right-wing extremists, between the genuine Marxist-Leninist intellectuals and both the ruling clique and these two tendencies we mentioned. And, finally, the Russian Ivan will awaken from his heavy slumber. The Soviet working class, led by the Marxist-Leninist revolutionaries, must come out and will come out in the streets to have its say. It will bang its fist on the table and stage a second proletarian revolution. We are convinced that this will happen, because it is dialectical process that is bound to take place, the circumstances, the events and their development will make the situation ripe for this. When? That is not for us to decide. Learning from all these developments in the revisionist countries, from the tactics, the forms and methods of the struggle waged by the modern revisionists against Marxism-Leninism, against the dictatorship of the proletariat, against the working class, its party and the socialist regime. In addition to what we have analyzed at other times, our party has defined clear-cut tasks to ensure that modern revisionism or any other anti-Marxist disease will never be allowed to infect the healthy body and mind of the party and the dictatorship of the proletariat in our country. With regard to the revisionist degeneration in a number of countries, mention must be made of some typical characteristics common to all the revisionist parties. It is a fact that the working class, in the first place, and then all the working masses, were caught unawares. They did not react immediately and strongly against the betrayal committed against their great cause, which had triumphed and been consolidated at such a cost in bloodshed and sacrifice. The traitor elements who usurped power in the party and the state, not only at the beginning of their subversive activity, when they knew how to hide and organize themselves, but even later, when their attitude and their treacherous actions had become obvious, did not encounter fierce resistance on the part of the working class and its party, which on the contrary, accepted the yoke of the traitors without any great opposition or, even when they did react, did so half-heartedly. The party and the working class, in the first place, had lost their vigilance and that vigor of violence which should always characterize them in the class struggle, in the struggle against every enemy of their class and socialism. Why does this happen and what causes this apathy, this dying down of their vigilance and use of violence, not only in communist parties with little revolutionary experience, but even in the oldest and biggest party with colossal revolutionary experience such as the Bolshevik Party was? In general, there is nothing unknown or mysterious about the reasons for this occurrence, but in this article we shall emphasize certain reasons which appear to us to be the main ones, those most dangerous to a Marxist-Leninist party. Let us consider how this has happened to the Bolshevik Party, the oldest and staunchest revolutionary party, from the successes and mistakes of which all of us have learned. First, and above all, stands the question of the party. It is here that we must try to find the shortcomings and errors which contributed so tragically to the emergence of revisionism and the seizure of power by the Khrushchevite traitors in the Soviet Union. Surprising as this may seem, the political and ideological education of the Bolshevik Party was not always carried out at each stage with the intensity and thoroughness required by the circumstances. Such education, moreover, had weaknesses of form and method and, sometimes, even of content. Although it was talked about, the linking of the theory with practical revolutionary action was not carried out as much and in the way it should have been over its whole range, in order to put politics first in the work for the revolutionization of people. In keeping the proletarian revolutionary spirit of the whole party vigorous, in ensuring that everybody understood and applied the line of the party in a revolutionary way in everything. It is true that if there were any schools, training courses, forms, means, methods, etc., for political and ideological education, they were in the Soviet Union. The same thing could be said, too, in regard to the training and education of cadres. The question is not that the study of the unerring Marxist-Leninist-Stalinist theory was neglected in the Soviet Union, but that something caused the political and ideological education to be defective. And this something was not only the forms, the methods and the rate of progress, which, as we said above, meant that the theory was not properly mastered and correctly put into practice. There was also a complex of other things that exerted a negative influence. The implementation of the norms of the Bolshevik Party or, to put it better, the profound ideological and political understanding and carrying out of them in practice in a revolutionary way, were not up to the mark. All these norms were correct. Lenin created and established them with a titanic struggle. Stalin affirmed them, defended them and carried them out. But in actual life, during the process of development, in the course of the work and the struggle, we see these norms, which at first were properly implemented, later falling into disuse. Becoming rusty and finally distorted and turned into a harsh and very dangerous weapon in the hands of the enemies of the class and of the party. This was the case in all the revisionist parties. In these parties they speak loudly of democratic centralism, but it is Leninist no longer. They speak of Bolshevik criticism and self-criticism, but they are Bolshevik no longer. They speak of party discipline, but it is no longer Leninist, but fascist discipline. They speak of proletarian morality, but the morality is Bourgeois, anti-proletarian, anti-Marxist. They speak of free expression of opinions within the party about everything and everybody, but the expression of opinions in the party spirit. In the proletarian spirit, in the revisionist countries now leads to jail and concentration camps. The same may be said with regard to all the genuine Leninist party norms. Thus, the official norms, irrespective of how they are disguised, are anti-Leninist, are bourgeois, reactionary, fascist norms. Such a change from the Leninist norms, which constitute the strength of the party as a steel-like vanguard organization of the proletariat, to revisionist norms is the greatest evil that can befall a Marxist-Leninist party. Is the terrible weapon for the degeneration and disintegration of the party, making it deviate from its historic role of transforming society. The fact is that this retrogressive change on this issue has taken place in the Communist Party of the Soviet Union and in the other revisionist parties, and, irrespective of the fact that not all the Soviet communists approve of and comply with these anti-Leninist norms. It is indisputable that the revisionist norms actually prevail in this party and in other revisionist parties and are destroying the parties and socialism in these countries. Now we may ask the question, had the Marxist-Leninist policy and ideology been understood and implemented correctly, as we said above, had the Leninist norms of the party, established in the Bolshevik Party by the great teachers Lenin and Stalin, been implemented in a correct revolutionary way and at all times, would this that has occurred have happened? No. It would not have happened. But it did happen, for the reasons given above and those we shall set out below. C. The Communist Party, as the organized vanguard detachment of the working class, must be the leader, the keen edge of the sword. It must preserve, develop and temper the finest virtues of the working class. It must be the first to properly master and implement the ideology of the working class. Marxism-Leninism, above all, it must be vigilant to the extreme and unyielding towards the class enemy. And in order to be such, it must have, understand, and implement the Leninist norms that make it the party of the class, in order to lead the working class and its allies towards the aims of the class. This is a great unity, not any sort of unity, but what we call Marxist-Leninist unity within the party, unity of thought and action on the basis of the Leninist norms, between the base of the party and its leadership, unity within the leadership itself. A steel Marxist-Leninist unity between the party and the working class, a steel, harmonious, party working class people unity. And in this whole unity, the fundamental idea its basis and guarantee, is the party working class unity, the decisive leadership of the working class headed by its party, inspired, tempered and enlightened by its Marxist-Leninist ideology. This unity is not created in one day or 1 year. It must be established and strengthened in the heat of many struggles and dangers with which they are confronted by the class enemy, which uses every means, objective and subjective, political and ideological, repression and terror, coercive measures and economic unrest. Open corruption and illegal subversive activity against the working class in general, against its party as an organization, against the party members, and the functionaries of the state and the organizations of the masses in particular. We shall not dwell at length on these issues, but shall only point out that the preservation and tempering of unity is not something achieved once and for all so that the communists need not trouble about it again. Second, that unity in the social democratic manner, unity of comrades. Outside the Marxist-Leninist principles and norms of the party, unity to avoid upsetting someone or other by permitting the violation of norms and principles, is not our unity. Our unity is not unity for unity's sake, contravening principles. Therefore, our unity, over the entire range we mentioned, is created through struggle, is tempered through struggle and preserved through continuous consistent revolutionary struggle. Otherwise there can be no Marxist-Leninist unity. In the Bolshevik party of Lenin and Stalin there was unity, and there was energetic struggle to temper this unity, but it cannot be said that perfection had been attained in everything, for that would be a denial of the class struggle, within and outside the country, within the party ranks. That would make us forget the class enemy who wages a fierce struggle in every form and whose only aim is to smash the unity, to infiltrate into the organisms of the party and the dictatorship, to riddle them with worms and destroy them. To infiltrate the consciousness and the world outlook of the communists, to demoralize them and cause them to degenerate. Thus, in the Bolshevik party of Lenin and Stalin they were proceeding on the correct Leninist road, and the successes in the construction of socialism, in the construction of the first powerful socialist state in the world prove this. Stalin, at the head of the Bolshevik party, fought correctly, vigorously, with deep understanding and without committing theoretical and political errors, on the road of the working class, on the road of the Leninist party, of its norms, to achieve the aims of the class and its party, which were the building of socialism and communism in the Soviet Union and in the world. However, the question arises, if this was so, then why did the Bolshevik party degenerate into a revisionist party after the death of Stalin? This is a reasonable question which must be asked, and in order to answer it one must discover the objective and subjective reasons. We have already pointed out in other articles that this question is as important as it is difficult to deal with thoroughly and without mistakes, if we do not base ourselves on the documents, especially the internal ones, of the Bolshevik party. Documents which we do not possess and could hardly possess, especially in the present situation. However, our ideology and the experience of our party and other parties can help us to determine some of these reasons. We say some, because there are and must be many more. However, these opinions, too, may be incomplete. Presenting the problem as we put it above, it turns out that gradually, without being aware of it and on the basis of the great successes of the realization of the socialist construction, among the cadres of the Soviet party and socialist state there was created a certain self-complacency and legitimate pride, but which, unwittingly assumed ever more pronounced, though latent, forms until they turned into incorrect inclinations which were basically incompatible with proletarian morality. Marxist ideology in education condemned them in principle and in practice, when they manifested themselves in a flagrant and dangerous way, but these trends were developing in the general form and this was not considered a dangerous thing. They entwined themselves with the norms of the party and gradually gave them such a tinge. Later they would become more pronounced and combined with other non-proletarian habits, would be added to the dangerous complex. The members of the Bolshevik party, who were led in legendary battles by Lenin and Stalin, were cadres of revolutionary class origin and drive, tempered in revolution, in struggles, in the building of socialism, in the battles against Trotskyism, deviators and other traitors. They were tempered ideologically and politically and had unshakable and justified faith in their glorious Bolshevik party, in Lenin and Stalin, in the correct line and norms that these had laid down. To them the party was everything, it was their heart, brain and eyes, therefore they defended it, were educated by it and their great leader. But while the Soviet cadres tried to carry out the correct line and norms of the party headed by Stalin, at first not among all of them and not in a clear-cut way, the feeling of stability, which is alien to the revolutionary sense of development, gradually began to spread and crystallize. So long as they held lower-level functions, the cadres worked zealously to serve the cause of the revolution in the best possible manner, rigorously implementing the norms and line of the party, maintaining close connections with the masses and with the working class. But with the passage of time, when the initial when the knot-on difficulties had been overcome, when the indispensable ideological, political and general education and culture had been acquired, having grown older and having gained seniority in the party, in certain people bad tendencies began to emerge. The successes in their work nurtured the feeling of self-complacency and, along with this, the Soviet cadres lost their proletarian modesty. They began to raise improper claims, which they described as politically justified, because they had worked and fought. With their promotion to more and more responsible posts, the desire for personal ease and comfort developed in them and they became more and more infected by bureaucracy, intellectualism and technocratism. Thus, gradually, a separation and inequality was created between the cadres of the Bolshevik party and Soviet state, on the one hand, and the masses of the Soviet people and working class, on the other. Many cadres did not listen to the voice of the masses as they had done in the past. The idea began to prevail among them that they knew everything themselves, that they were specialists in everything, that they stood above the masses, above the working class politically and ideologically, and were more far-sighted than they. These cadres confused the authority and prestige which the Bolshevik Party and Stalin enjoyed among the masses of the Soviet people and in the working class with their personal authority and prestige. All these anti-proletarian features led to deformation of the revolutionary concepts among these cadres, and from this the infection spread to the line of the party and its implementation, and the revolutionary norms of the party remained formal. The process of sclerosis had set in the life of the party itself and its organization, as well as in the whole Soviet state administration. Therefore, the education, the equipping of the cadres of the party, the state and the administration with schooling and culture is one of the most important problems. But an even greater prime duty is their political and ideological education and their permanent revolutionize. The danger of the development of bureaucracy in cadres and of equipping only them with schooling and culture, is that it can and does create in them a feeling of superiority and conceit. Causes the features of intellectualism and technocratism, which gradually place them above the masses of the party and the class, to take root in them, and thus, little by little, a situation is created in which a stratum dominates the class and its proletarian party. Makes the party sclerotic and its revolutionary norms lifeless, propagates them without zeal and strips them of their revolutionary influence and action. This leads to separation from the masses and from the direction of the working class. If the party and the working class do not pay continuous special attention to the ideological and political uplift of the cadres, and not just through bookish methodes, but through practical actions and in uninterrupted daily struggle, then their promotion to leading positions. The disproportion between their educational and cultural level and that of the great bulk of the party and the working class, their seniority in the party or in the state organs. The great disparity in salaries and the privileges to which they are allegedly entitled as cadres ruin the cadre, willy-nilly impel him gradually to adopt features which are not of the proletarian class. Such a phenomenon may occur even with cadres of worker origin and status, but it is a still greater danger among those from the peasantry and the intelligentsia. The party of the working class must educate the cadres in such a way that they not only advance and are promoted to posts of responsibility, but also understand properly when it is necessary for them to be taken down from posts of responsibility, and this not only in cases when they prove incapable and inactive in the function with which they are charged, or for mistakes in their work and in life, but even when they are capable and do their jobs properly. The cadres should be educated to realize that even when they are in order, their removal from functions of responsibility and their going to work in the ranks of the working class and the working masses is a necessity, is for the good of the cadres themselves and the party. For the present and the future. The three features we mentioned above, bureaucracy, intellectualism and technocratism, brought about that within the Bolshevik party and the Soviet state that revolutionary spirit of heroic times did not prevail as it should. This insidious disease did not openly attack the correct line of the party. The cadres remained faithful to it and to Stalin. They were ready to go through fire for him, because Stalin was a man of the class. With his Marxist-Leninist class clarity, he did not commit errors of principle either in policy or in ideology, in the economy or in the military field. He loyally defended everything Leninist and developed Leninism further. However, in this stagnation which was gradually building up, although the Stalinist energy of the party and the dictatorship of the proletariat was still carrying the work forward, sclerosis was setting in the work of the party, the norms were implemented but not with revolutionary vigor. The line was carried out but not at that revolutionary tempo. Marxism-Leninism was being taught but in such a way that it was no longer able to purge these dangerous trends. Many top and middle cadres of the party and state equipped with diplomas were, so to speak, viewing the situation from above, and especially from the petty bourgeois feeling of their own all-round superiority. They had come to believe that this was something natural, that they were superior to the bulk of the party. They were assuming the features of a class above the class and above the party, considered themselves infallible, because they were in the leadership, because they had long experience, because they possessed knowledge, and it was they who brought the sunshine and the rain. All these anti-Marxist viewpoints were developing, wittingly or unwittingly, under cover of the party norms. There was talk about democratic centralism, criticism and self-criticism, party discipline, and elections from below, but all these things had lost their revolutionary spirit. And what could all this bring about? The gradual separation of the leadership from the bulk of the party, and of the party from the working class. Thus, in essence, that Marxist-Leninist unity which we mentioned above was weakened. Stalin had forged the Leninist unity and he fought to defend it, notwithstanding the stagnation that existed. After his death, the disruption of the unity in the leadership and in the Bolshevik party took place and the revisionists seized power. Khrushchev and his traitorous associates had been working even when Stalin was alive, of course in very disguised forms. After Stalin's death, profiting by the situation that had been created, they seized power. They sought and are seeking to preserve the whole of the negative process and deepen it further, by completing the transformation to capitalism and the liquidation of the Bolshevik party of Lenin and Stalin. The attack on Stalin was an attack on Leninism, on Marxism-Leninism. That is why they have removed or are getting rid of those whom they call Stalinists and, masquerading as Leninists, they are striving to make the process of the liquidation of the party, as a Marxist-Leninist party of the proletariat. More thoroughgoing day by day and to isolate the Soviet working class, to lull it to sleep, to make it amorphous and apolitical, so as to avoid the blows which it could deal them. Of course, there are other reasons, too, but we think that these factors we have mentioned caused the working class of the Soviet Union and hundreds of thousands and millions of Soviet party and state cadres to be caught off guard. They thought and still think that what Khrushchev did was, on the Leninist road and in accord with the Leninist rules. They were deceived by the slanders, the demagogy and the promises of the traitors, but of course this will not go on for long. The eyes of the Soviet working class and revolutionaries are being and will be opened properly, and they will recover the fighting spirit of the revolutionary struggles through which Lenin and Stalin led them. They must come out in the streets, arms in hand, and they will come out, if not today, tomorrow. The situation will ripen. Time is working for the proletarian revolution. This process has occurred in the other revisionist parties, too, but even more deeply, for the reason that, apart from the Polish party, the parties of the revisionist countries are parties which have not waged the struggle themselves, have not gone through that furnace. Irrespective of their self-advertisement as allegedly old parties which have been through the fight. Their experience on this issue, and this is the main issue, is very poor if they have any at all. Moreover, these parties were revived, reorganized and took power thanks to the Soviet army in the direct aid of the Bolshevik party and Stalin. This assistance was vital to them, not only because they were re-established materially, but also because it helped them to create political and ideological cohesion in their ranks. Later, in such parties as the Polish, German, Czechoslovak, Hungarian and other parties, an organizational, political and ideological union was brought about between the communist, socialist and social democratic parties. Thus, instead of remaining outside, in the front the social democratic maggot was introduced within the party. The wine was watered down, and now it has turned into vinegar. While Stalin was alive, the social democratic parties of Serenkiewicz, Otto Grotwohl, Vierlinger, kept a low profile, but they were working from within, corroding, demoralizing, and seizing as many important positions as they could. When Khrushchev came to power, of course these elements were overjoyed. Later the separation began, and it was a radical one, since degeneration had become deeply implanted in these parties and these countries. Whereas the Marxist-Leninist Gottwald brought the armed workers out in the streets and made reaction tremble and scurry back into its rat holes, now the revisionist Dubček has a part of the Czechoslovak working class on his side. This is what happened in Hungary, too, but not entirely so in Poland, for the Polish working class has a more revolutionary tradition. But the struggle to win the working class and to arouse it in revolution should be the main objective of every Marxist-Leninist party. There is no and there cannot be proletarian revolution without the working class and without the leadership of the Marxist-Leninist party. The students and intellectuals must be raised in revolution and led by the working class and the Marxist-Leninist party. However, the opposite can occur, as in the revisionist countries, if they are not put in their proper place in the revolution and if they are not educated correctly in the revolutionary way. The youth can never assume the role and carry out the tasks with which history has charged the working class. The working class and the party of the class must be at the head, in absolute leadership, everywhere and in everything. The peasantry and the various social strata must advance on the road of the working class, in alliance with it, must be educated with its laws and its ideology, and whoever does not advance on this road and put spokes in the wheels must be discarded, by persuasion or by violence, as may be necessary. In the light of all that we have said, the correctness of the Marxist-Leninist road and line pursued by our party in all the stages of its development, even at the most critical moments, and its boundless loyalty to the revolutionary ideas and work of Marx, Engels, Lenin and Stalin, stand out even more clearly. But our party has never lost sight of the fact that no communist party, including our own, is immune to the danger of revisionism. It has always maintained keen vigilance against this danger and has never rested on its laurels. Our party has accumulated rich experience, and is elaborating it every day, on how to bar the way to revisionism and the restoration of capitalism. The measures which the party has taken for the further revolutionization of the whole life of the country, for the perfecting and development of the socialist relations of production and of the superstructure, in order to purge them of everything alien, are of decisive importance and vital to the cause of socialism. It has waged and is waging the class struggle in the correct Marxist-Leninist way, inside and outside the party, and this is the motive force during the whole period of the transition from capitalism to socialism. It has attached prime importance to the revolutionary class education of the working people, the younger generation in particular, in various ways, especially through revolutionary action. It has waged and is waging a principled and consistent struggle against any form of bureaucratic distortion, for the constant deepening of the line of the masses in all fields, for the continuous perfecting of socialist democracy. Above all, special attention has been devoted to the continuous revolutionization of the party and its cadres, so that they never become isolated from the people, lose their revolutionary features and spirit, or become bureaucratic and degenerate. The party has never lost sight of the dialectical operation of various factors, with all their positive and negative influences. It has carried out and continues to carry out in depth all-round measures of revolutionization, of education, of work and struggle on all fronts which give rise to a number of problems, great and small, but all important and closely interconnected. Especially on the front of the ideological class education and the class struggle. Thus, it has continued and continues the struggle on all fronts, without interruption, at an ever higher level, always learning from the successes and shortcomings, so that the shortcomings will not be repeated and the successes will not intoxicate it and put it to sleep. Our party and people are advancing on this correct Marxist-Leninist road with unwavering confidence in the construction of socialism and communism. In today's conditions, when the revisionist cliques are completely liquidating all the victories of socialism in their respective countries, the working class of these countries must clearly understand that the revisionist party in power is no longer a party of the proletariat, but an instrument in the hands of treacherous leaders for the restoration of capitalism and the deception of the masses. Today there is no longer room for illusions, hesitation and temporization. The working class of the revisionist countries is now faced with the historic necessity of taking again the battlefield, of hurling itself into a merciless and consistent fight to the finish to overthrow and smash the treacherous cliques, to carry out the proletarian revolution once again and to re-establish the dictatorship of the proletariat. This absolutely requires determination, courage, sacrifices and a revival of the revolutionary spirit and traditions of the times of Lenin and Stalin. In the first place and above all, this requires the organization of the genuine revolutionaries into new Marxist-Leninist parties which have to mobilize, organize, and lead the general uprising of the proletariat and the other working masses to victory. At these important moments for the destinies of the revolution, all the Marxist-Leninists and the world proletariat cannot remain silent spectators in the face of what is happening in the revisionist countries. Proletarian internationalism demands that all revolutionaries raise their voices and wage a principled struggle, through to the end, for the destruction of the revisionist cliques in power and give all their support to the working class and the people that are under the revisionist rule today to overthrow these treacherous cliques and raise the banner of revolution and socialism once more. Against Modern Revisionism, 1968.